It began in November 1940 with a delivery to Lido, Ohio, that would reshape warfare itself. The Willys Overland plant had just pulled off what many thought impossible. 75 days. That's all the engineers needed to design, build, and hand over two prototype vehicles to the United States Army. The contraption they'd created was called the Quad, named after its four-wheel drive capability. It was compact, angular, stripped down to bare essentials. Nothing about its humble appearance suggested it would become the most coveted vehicle in military history. Yet within just 4 years, something remarkable would happen. German officers would stake their lives to seize these machines. They'd prize them above nearly everything else the Americans produced. They'd grudgingly admit that the United States had engineered something their own brilliant minds could not replicate. But that recognition didn't come easily. The story actually starts with doubt and dismissal. Late in 1941, when German intelligence got their hands on photographs of these early American prototypes, the reaction was swift and cold. Pure skepticism. The thing looked primitive, stripped down to nothing. No doors. A windshield that folded flat against the hood. The body was just simple pressed steel, bolted together, obviously, with almost zero protection from weather or shrapnel. To German military strategists who'd invested years perfecting the Volkswagen Kübelwagen, this American creation looked sloppy and thrown together. By early 1942, German intelligence was writing formal reports describing it as hastily assembled, lacking the engineering refinement you'd expect from any serious military machine. The Germans backed their Kübelwagen with real confidence. Ferdinand Porsche had designed it himself, building on the foundation of Hitler's people's car. It weighed less than the early Jeep designs, had a clever flat underbody that helped it slip over rough spots, and despite having only rear-wheel drive, performed impressively in trials. German engineers were convinced their approach was smarter. Why complicate things with four-wheel drive systems when good design could achieve the same performance with far simpler mechanics? This confidence would turn out to be tragically wrong. But the American Jeep wasn't hastily thrown together at all. It came out of intense rivalry, savage testing, and constant refinement. Back in June 1940, the United States Army had thrown down one of the most challenging demands the automotive industry had ever seen. They needed a quarter-ton reconnaissance vehicle, 3 men and their gear, cross-country capability in any weather and any terrain. Simple enough that anybody could drive it. Tough enough to handle combat punishment. Light enough that 4 soldiers could lift it out when it got stuck. The requirements were painfully specific, almost impossible. Wheelbase under 80 inches, height under 40 inches, weight below 1,300 pounds, 4-wheel drive mandatory, it had to climb grades of 60%. It needed to ford through 18 inches of water. And the clock was ticking. 49 days from when you signed the contract to when you delivered a working prototype. Most automotive makers took one look and walked away. 3 companies decided to risk it. American Bantam Car Company, a small operation in Butler, Pennsylvania, that had been making miniature vehicles, shocked everyone by delivering the first working prototype right on schedule, September 23, 1940. They called it the Blitz Buggy. It performed beautifully in initial testing, but the Army brass had serious doubts. Could a company that had only manufactured 1,200 vehicles in 1939 possibly scale up to produce tens of thousands for military use? The Army strategy was clever. They invited 2 bigger manufacturers to study the Bantam design and come back with their own versions, with whatever improvements they thought mattered. Willys Overland from Toledo, Ohio, and Ford Motor Company both took careful looks at Bantam's work, then built their own iterations with enhancements. This created 3 different vehicles, each with its own advantages, and they got tested brutally through the rest of 1940 and into 1941. Bantam had shown the way with the basic layout. Willys contributed the Go Devil engine that pumped out 60 horsepower. Ford took the body design and refined it, creating the flat hood and integrated headlights that people still recognize today. When July 1941 came around, the Army made its choice. Willys would be the main producer, but they'd blend in the best ideas from all 3 companies. Ford would manufacture identical vehicles using the same exact specifications. By November 1941, Just weeks before Pearl Harbor changed everything, the Willis MB and Ford GPW rolled off assembly lines in full production. What came out of those Toledo and Detroit factories had never existed before. The MB and GPW were mechanically identical. Both were 132 inches long, 62 inches wide, 72 inches tall with the windshield up, and weighed 2,160 pounds. That Go Devil engine displaced 134 cubic inches and cranked out 60 horsepower at 4,000 RPM. On decent roads, it could hit nearly 60 mph. With nearly 9 inches of ground clearance, it could cross terrain that would stop every conventional vehicle in its path. The four-wheel drive system featured a 2-speed transfer case controlled by simple floor levers. You could engage or disengage it without climbing out. But there was something else that made it special. This vehicle could be fixed in the field with nothing but basic tools. The engine had been engineered for reliability, not precision. Parts were actually loose compared to civilian engines, which sounds backward, but actually made the whole thing more dependable in combat. If one component failed, you grabbed a part from another Jeep and it fit perfectly. Nothing had to match exactly. Everything worked with everything else. The name itself came from this adaptability. Historians still argue about where exactly it came from, but most agree Jeep came from soldiers saying GP, which was military shorthand for general purpose or government procurement. When soldiers tested early versions in 1941, they started calling them Jeeps, possibly borrowing from a Popeye cartoon character named Eugene the Jeep, who could go anywhere and do anything without limits. The name took hold. In February 1941, a Washington Daily News journalist got a ride in one of the brand-new production models. He asked the driver what he was sitting in. "It's a Jeep," the driver told him. The story ran all across the country. Willis Overland saw the marketing opportunity and trademarked the name in 1943, though soldiers had been using it unofficially for 2 years already. General George Marshall, running the entire army, declared the Jeep was America's single greatest gift to modern warfare. War correspondent Ernie Pyle, who'd been embedded with American troops from North Africa through Sicily, Italy, France, and into the Pacific, wrote that the Jeep was faithful as a dog, tough as a mule, and nimble as a goat. It could do anything. It went everywhere, but these kinds of compliments came later. In early 1942, as Jeeps began reaching combat theaters, German intelligence officers weren't changing their minds. The real clash between German forces and American Jeeps happened in North Africa in late 1942. Operation Torch, the massive Allied invasion of French North Africa, put American soldiers face-to-face with Axis troops for the first time in the war. Thousands of Jeeps came ashore with the invasion. German and Italian soldiers got their first real look at what Americans had been manufacturing by the thousands back home. What Germany's military observers reported back was contradictory. Later captured intelligence from early 1943 did acknowledge that the Jeep had speed and decent cross-country performance. But the reports slammed what they saw as terrible fuel economy, practically no armor, and extreme vulnerability to mines and rifle fire. One report suggested that Americans must have an almost unlimited supply of these vehicles, which looked more like wasteful overproduction than genuine military strategy. The Kübelwagen, these analysts insisted, got similar results while burning half the fuel and using simpler engineering. But when German headquarters in Tunisia examined their first captured Jeep in January 1943, even the critical observers found things bothering them. The engine wasn't sealed against mud and debris. The canvas roof offered zero protection from shrapnel or gunfire. The fuel tank mounted right under the driver's seat seemed like asking to be blown up. The basic 3-speed transmission wasn't as refined as German designs. Still, some observations were deeply worrying. The power-to-weight ratio on this thing was stunning. 60 horsepower moving just 2,100 pounds meant it could accelerate faster than almost anything Germany had in its light vehicle arsenal. That four-wheel drive, engaged by simple floor levers, operated flawlessly even sinking into deep sand. What really troubled the Germans was understanding the numbers. Documents from captured American equipment showed production rates that German intelligence kept recalculating, convinced there had to be a translation error. According to those captured documents, Willis and Ford together were building Jeeps at a rate of one completed vehicle every single 90 seconds during peak production periods. Every 90 seconds. The German officers did their math over and over. There was no error in translation. By early 1943, American factories had already rolled out more than 177,000 of these vehicles. German production of every light military vehicle combined had barely touched 50,000. The impact of those numbers was crushing to consider. If American factories could produce reconnaissance vehicles at these kinds of rates, what did that say about tanks, artillery, aircraft production? How could Germany hope to compete with this kind of industrial machine? The first solid reports of German soldiers intentionally capturing American Jeeps came from Tunisia in March 1943. Following the Battle of Kasserine Pass, where German forces had initially pushed American troops back before being forced to withdraw, retreating German units grabbed every Jeep they could find that still ran. Officers started writing in their reports that these captured American vehicles had proven essential for reconnaissance missions and command functions. The reasons became obvious as the North African campaign wore on. The landscape of Tunisia presented a brutal combination: rocky mountain passes, vast expanses of deep sand, wadis that turned into rivers, coastal routes in various stages of decay. German vehicles struggled against it all. The Kübelwagen, for all its clever engineering, simply lacked the engine power needed to push up steep inclines while carrying full combat loads. Its rear-wheel drive, adequate on test courses, proved completely inadequate when survival depended on speed over rough terrain. The heavier German vehicles drank fuel at rates that shattered already stretched supply lines. The American Jeep seemed almost designed for these exact conditions. That powerful engine would haul it up grades where Kübelwagens got stuck and bogged down. The four-wheel drive maintained grip in sand and mud where rear-wheel drive vehicles just spun uselessly in place. But perhaps most crucial, captured Jeeps came equipped with something German vehicles lacked: abundant replacement parts. American logistics were so thoroughly organized that supply depots held enormous stockpiles of spare components. German mechanics discovered they could keep captured Jeeps running almost indefinitely just by helping themselves to American supply dumps. Lieutenant Wolfgang Müller, leading a reconnaissance battalion in Tunisia, made an entry in his personal journal during April 1943. His men had managed to capture 6 American Jeeps and immediately put them into active service. 2 weeks later, he was requesting that higher command completely replace his own German vehicles with captured American equipment. The Jeeps were just faster, more reliable, and required less maintenance than anything in his original motor pool. When his request got denied because of fuel worries, he wrote bitterly in his journal that his Kübelwagens were burning nearly identical amounts of fuel while covering only half the distance. By May 1943, Axis forces in North Africa collapsed entirely. On May 13th, Jürgen von Arnim surrendered approximately 250,000 German and Italian soldiers into Allied captivity. Left behind or destroyed were several hundred captured American Jeeps that German units had been operating. When Allied intelligence personnel went through abandoned Axis equipment, they were startled to discover so many of their own vehicles sitting in German motor pools. Interrogating captured German officers produced the same story repeatedly. Given a choice between a German Kübelwagen and a captured American Jeep, officers selected the Jeep almost without exception. German military units had been running captured American vehicles for months. Maintenance records showed these vehicles regularly logged more operational hours than German equipment. The fuel issue turned out to be academic when German logistics were collapsing anyway. By June 1943, intelligence reports from North Africa reached Berlin and German high command. The conclusions were uncomfortable to face. American industrial capacity was producing vehicles at volumes Germany could never hope to match. That American Jeep, initially dismissed as crude and primitive, was clearly superior for reconnaissance and light transport missions. German units were actively hunting to capture and operate enemy vehicles, which indicated real problems with German military equipment. Some German officers pushed for speeding up production of four-wheel drive versions of the Kübelwagen. Other voices argued that Germany simply couldn't match American production volumes. and should redirect efforts toward areas where German engineering held genuine advantages, particularly heavy tanks and artillery systems. The argument became irrelevant. By summer 1943, German industry was already straining to maintain even current production levels amid intensifying Allied bombing campaigns. Designing an entirely new four-wheel drive light vehicle was completely unrealistic. Germany would continue fighting with what it possessed. Back in America, Jeep production just kept climbing. By the final months of 1943, total production had surpassed 360,000 vehicles. The assembly process had been refined to remarkable efficiency levels. At the Toledo plant, Willis workers could take raw materials and completely assemble one finished Jeep in under 3 hours. Components were manufactured across factories in 32 different states, then shipped to Toledo or to Ford facilities in Dallas and Louisville for final assembly. The standardization was so thorough that parts from any factory fit perfectly into any vehicle. A carburetor built in Wisconsin worked flawlessly in a Jeep that had been assembled in Kentucky. This complete interchangeability, combined with production volumes nobody had ever seen before, created a logistical system that had never existed in military history. Every Jeep operating in the field could be serviced using components from any supply depot anywhere. The German logistics system operated on a fundamentally different principle than American organization. Their vehicles came from multiple manufacturers, each producing components that weren't interchangeable with others. Supply officers managing these diverse motor pools faced constant headaches trying to keep everything running. Spare parts didn't transfer between vehicles from different makers, creating bottlenecks at every level. Everything shifted dramatically when the Allies landed in Italy during September 1943. British and German forces came ashore at Salerno, bringing thousands of Jeeps into the combat zone. From that moment forward, German soldiers encountered American mechanization on a scale they'd never experienced before. The mountains of southern Italy proved to be the Jeeps' proving ground. The terrain was merciless, the roads little more than narrow tracks carved into hillsides. Vehicles that struggled in such conditions became practically useless. But Jeeps thrived. German forces trying to establish defensive positions discovered they couldn't match the speed of American reconnaissance units bouncing across trails that would break heavier vehicles. Surprise became nearly impossible as a German tactic. American Jeep patrols moved constantly, gathering intelligence about German positions and movements. German commanders found their own plans exposed before they could execute them. American infantry regiments had roughly 145 Jeeps assigned to each unit. That translated to commanders who could shift troops rapidly, respond to threats instantly, and stay one step ahead of their opponents. A German regimental commander commanded only a handful of staff cars and motorcycles. His American opposite number had entire fleets of Jeeps at his disposal. These vehicles could reposition soldiers in minutes, evacuate casualties, haul supplies forward, or maintain constant communication across vast distances. The advantages multiplied across every tactical situation. German medical officers especially noticed the casualty evacuation differences. American Jeeps converted to ambulances by mounting stretchers across the rear seats, transported wounded soldiers rapidly from the battlefield. Injured men reached field hospitals within moments of being wounded, dramatically increasing their chances of survival. German wounded faced agonizing hours-long journeys bouncing over rough roads in conventional ambulances. The survival rates told the story. Captured German medical personnel expressed genuine astonishment at how quickly American soldiers received treatment. Whisked away from combat zones by vehicles that could navigate absolutely any terrain. In December 1943, American intelligence officers interviewed General Friedrich Schultz. Captured near Cassino, when they asked him about American equipment, his answer was blunt. German generals, he said, admired the Jeep more than any other piece of American equipment they'd encountered. They wanted to capture them, use them, and study them more than anything else. This represented a complete reversal from the dismissive attitude German officers had expressed just 18 months earlier. By the start of 1944, German forces in Italy craved captured Jeeps so intensely that High Command issued specific regulations about their use. These vehicles had to be clearly marked with German insignia to prevent friendly fire incidents. Crews received specialized training on how to operate and maintain them. Despite Jeeps consuming more fuel than Kübelwagens, fuel allocation went to these captured vehicles as priority. The reasoning was straightforward. One Jeep could accomplish reconnaissance missions that normally required 2 or 3 German vehicles. Speed, range, and cross-country performance made them far more valuable than German alternatives, regardless of fuel consumption. Units operating captured Jeeps reported dramatically improved tactical mobility. They conducted reconnaissance missions deeper into Allied territory, moving faster and covering greater distances than Kübelwagens could manage. The four-wheel drive system allowed them to operate in conditions that would strand German vehicles completely. Weather and terrain that stopped German light trucks meant nothing to a Jeep. The intelligence benefits were enormous. A German reconnaissance crew in a captured Jeep could sometimes pass as American from a distance, slipping closer to Allied positions before identification. The mechanical reliability meant fewer breakdowns during critical missions. The simple construction allowed even basic mechanics to perform field repairs under combat conditions. Operation Grief during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 provided the most dramatic evidence of how desperately German forces wanted American Jeeps. When Hitler ordered Lieutenant Colonel Otto Skorzeny to conduct special operations behind American lines, Skorzeny specifically requested large numbers of captured American vehicles, particularly Jeeps. German commandos dressed in American uniforms needed to penetrate deep into Allied territory and spread confusion. Skorzeny wanted at least 100 captured Jeeps for the mission. German supply officers searched rear areas frantically, contacting every unit that might possess captured American vehicles. They managed to locate approximately 30 Jeeps, far short of requirements. The shortage forced Skorzeny to improvise, disguising German vehicles to resemble American equipment. That German forces, with Hitler's personal authority backing them, could only gather 30 Jeeps revealed how scarce they truly were. American forces simply had far too many Jeeps, and German forces had far too few opportunities to capture them intact. The commandos who did receive captured Jeeps for Operation Grief found them remarkably useful for infiltration work. Dressed in American uniforms and driving genuine American vehicles, German soldiers penetrated Allied lines and created real confusion during the opening stages of the Battle of the Bulge. American checkpoint guards became suspicious and paranoid, questioning everyone and asking trivia about American culture to verify identities. When captured, these German commandos consistently praised the Jeeps. They noted how speed allowed quick escapes, how maneuverability helped them evade checkpoints, and how no one gave a second look to one more Jeep among thousands. The operation failed at the strategic level, but it demonstrated how effectively German soldiers could employ American equipment when they possessed it. The Jeeps performed flawlessly in German hands, suggesting any perceived shortcomings stemmed from fuel constraints rather than engineering problems. France changed everything. When Operation Overlord launched in June 1944, approximately 20,000 Jeeps arrived in the initial invasion waves. German defenders faced an American army with mobility they'd never imagined possible. Every German report from the Normandy campaign emphasized American mobility advantages. While German infantry divisions relied primarily on horse-drawn transport with only small motorized components, American divisions were completely mechanized from top to bottom. American units could maneuver faster, concentrate forces more quickly, and respond to emerging threats with speed German commanders couldn't match. The Jeep sat at the center of this advantage. It worked as scout vehicle, command car, communications platform, weapons carrier, ambulance, and general transport. German officers captured in Normandy repeatedly mentioned American Jeeps when discussing equipment advantages. Colonel Hans von Luck commanded a Panzer reconnaissance battalion and later used a captured American Jeep for several weeks after his own vehicle was destroyed. In his memoirs, he wrote that it surpassed German reconnaissance vehicles in nearly every way except fuel economy. The fuel shortage plaguing German forces in France during summer 1944 made captured Jeeps increasingly impractical to operate, even when acquired intact. Some German commanders restricted captured Jeeps to only the most critical missions to preserve scarce fuel. Others simply abandoned them when fuel ran dry. German forces desperately wanted these vehicles, but often couldn't use them effectively even after capturing them. SS Panzer divisions, which received priority fuel allocation, continued operating captured jeeps through summer 1944 and reported they remained superior for reconnaissance despite high fuel consumption. The tactical mobility and flexibility justified the fuel cost. One captured SS officer told interrogators that his unit would happily trade 2 Kübelwagens for 1 American Jeep if fuel supplies made it feasible. The technical comparison between these vehicles explained why German soldiers so strongly preferred the American version. The Kübelwagen weighed roughly 1,600 pounds against the Jeep's 2,100 pounds. Its air-cooled engine produced 23 horsepower initially, upgraded to 25 horsepower in 1943, still barely half the Jeep's 60 horsepower. Power-to-weight ratios told the real story. The Kübelwagen achieved approximately 15 horsepower per ton, while the Jeep achieved approximately 28 horsepower per ton. Performance differences were striking. The Jeep accelerated faster, climbed steeper grades, and maintained higher speeds throughout. The Kübelwagen topped out around 50 miles per hour on roads, but struggled to maintain that speed off-road. The Jeep approached 55 miles per hour on roads and could sustain 40 miles per hour across broken terrain. Four-wheel drive differences mattered even more. The Kübelwagen relied on rear-wheel drive with a self-locking differential and portal gear reduction hubs. This clever design provided surprisingly good off-road capability in many situations. The flat underbody allowed the vehicle to slide over obstacles rather than becoming stuck. In sand, snow, and mud, the Kübelwagen's lightweight and flat floor occasionally provided advantages. But on steep terrain, crossing major obstacles, or any situation demanding maximum traction, the Jeep's four-wheel drive proved decisively superior. Power delivered to all four wheels meant the Jeep could climb grades and traverse obstacles the Kübelwagen couldn't manage. American testing showed Jeeps could climb 60% grades when fully loaded. The Kübelwagen could barely manage 30% grades under similar conditions. Reliability represented another critical factor. The Kübelwagen's air-cooled engine was theoretically simple and reliable, but its limited power meant it ran constantly at maximum output during combat. This caused premature wear and failures. The Jeep's more powerful engine rarely reached maximum output, reducing stress and extending service life significantly. Maintenance requirements favored the Jeep as well. While the Kübelwagen was designed for simplicity, Jeep standardization meant parts were universally available everywhere. German mechanics working on Kübelwagens often waited weeks for replacement parts manufactured solely in Germany. American mechanics working on Jeeps grabbed parts from the nearest supply depot, where components were stocked by the thousands. The most telling comparison came from German units operating both vehicles. When given free choice with adequate fuel supplies, German soldiers almost universally preferred captured American Jeeps over their own Kübelwagens. This preference appeared consistently in captured documents, interrogation reports, and post-war memoirs from German officers commanding units with access to both vehicles. Production numbers revealed the true scope of American industrial advantage. Between 1941 and 1945, Willys produced 361,139 MBI Jeeps. Ford built 270,896 GPW Jeeps. Combined production exceeded 639,000 vehicles built to identical specifications. Germany, by contrast, produced exactly 50,435 Kübelwagens throughout the entire war. America built more than 12 times as many light vehicles as Germany. The ratio became even more favorable when considering that roughly 30% of American Jeep production went to Allied forces through Lend-Lease. Britain received thousands of Jeeps. The Soviet Union received tens of thousands. Free French forces were equipped entirely with American vehicles, including thousands of Jeeps. This meant German forces encountered Jeeps not just when fighting Americans, but also when engaging British, Soviet, and French units. The universal presence of Jeeps across all Allied forces created compounding advantages. When American, British, and Free French units operated together, they could share spare parts and maintenance support for their Jeeps. German forces faced a bewildering array of light vehicles from different manufacturers with completely non-interchangeable parts. Standardization extended far beyond the vehicles themselves. The American military trained mechanics using identical curricula regardless of theater assignment. A mechanic trained in Kansas could maintain Jeeps in Italy or the Pacific with equal competence. Training manuals were universal. Parts catalogs were applicable everywhere. This standardization created enormous efficiency gains that multiplied the value of American industrial production. Producing 600,000 identical vehicles proved strategically superior to producing 600,000 varied vehicles. The logistics advantages alone justified standardization. American supply officers calculated spare parts requirements, knowing every Jeep used identical components. German supply officers faced constant nightmares trying to stock parts for dozens of different vehicle types. The Jeep's versatility exceeded anything German planners had imagined for light vehicles. It served as reconnaissance car and command vehicle, but also in countless specialized roles. Machine gun-mounted Jeeps became fast-moving weapons platforms. The SAS in North Africa famously used Jeeps mounting multiple machine guns for raids on German airfields, approaching at high speed with guns blazing. Jeeps fitted with wire cutters protected crews from throat-height wires, Germans strung across roads. Jeeps equipped with radios became mobile communication centers. Jeeps mounting stretchers served as rapid ambulances. Jeeps towing small trailers moved supplies forward and casualties back. Jeeps fitted with railway wheels could run on tracks when roads were destroyed. Engineered Jeeps carried generators and welding equipment. Forward observers used Jeeps to move rapidly between firing positions. Reconnaissance units covered enormous distances, providing intelligence slower vehicles couldn't gather. Airborne divisions loaded Jeeps into gliders to provide paratroopers with immediate mobility after landing. The basic design's adaptability meant units could modify Jeeps for specific missions, using local resources and minimal tools. A standard Jeep became a weapons platform in hours by welding mounting brackets for machine guns. It became an ambulance in minutes by installing stretcher racks. This flexibility made the Jeep extraordinarily valuable in fluid combat situations where requirements changed constantly and unexpectedly. When the Kubelwagen rolled onto battlefields, it was undeniably tough and genuinely skilled at reconnaissance work. Yet here lay its fundamental limitation. Trying to reconfigure it for other missions proved genuinely difficult. Add armor, mount extra equipment, or install weapon systems, and the vehicle would bog down. That narrow performance margin left little room for expansion. The American Jeep operated on entirely different principles. Its engine had breathing room. Commanders could pile on armor plating, mount machine guns, tow wounded in trailers, or stack supplies without the vehicle gasping for power. This flexibility became absolutely critical as the war demanded increasingly creative solutions. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander overseeing all Allied operations in Europe, would later make a startling declaration. He identified the Jeep as one of his 5 most essential pieces of equipment for victory in both Africa and Europe. The other 4 were the C-47 transport planes, the 2.5-ton cargo truck, the bulldozer, and the amphibious DUKW vehicle. What makes Eisenhower's assessment remarkable is this: none of those 5 were weapons. Not a single one fired a shot. They were instruments of movement, tools for getting supplies where they needed to be, and machines for reshaping terrain. That a 4-star general, reviewing everything his massive military possessed, ranked the Jeep among his 5 most vital assets spoke volumes about its true strategic worth. The numbers coming off assembly lines during peak production absolutely stagger belief. In 1944, factories churned out Jeeps in such volume that combined monthly totals exceeded 15,000 units. That worked out to roughly 500 vehicles rolling off production lines every single day. Achieving this required an intricate dance of coordination among hundreds of component suppliers. Engines arrived from one factory, transmissions from another, axles from yet another. Body panels and frames converged on assembly lines with clockwork precision. Efficiency didn't plateau, it kept climbing. The manufacturing process learned and adapted constantly throughout the war years. Early production runs in 1941 consumed substantially more factory hours per vehicle than identical models rolling out in late 1944. Workers got faster, assembly lines became smarter, machines did more. Automation steadily whittled away at the human effort required. By the time 1944 arrived, the labor required to assemble one Jeep had dropped by nearly 40% compared to 1941's baseline, all while production volume had skyrocketed. The improvements traced directly to learning. The first contract in July 1941 priced each Jeep at $738.74. By 1944, refined processes had brought the effective cost down to roughly $600 per vehicle. America was simultaneously building more Jeeps, constructing them faster, and doing it cheaper. The German story moved in exactly the opposite direction. Their production dwindled. Their costs climbed. Their efficiency tanked under the relentless pounding from Allied bombing campaigns. The final year of the war, 1945, brought complete collapse for German industrial capacity. When fuel evaporated and ammunition ran out, German logistics simply ceased functioning. When German forces managed to seize abandoned American Jeeps left behind during retreats, they often couldn't use them anyway. The roads leading back into Germany became graveyards of discarded American vehicles as German armies fell apart. Yet even in those final desperate weeks when everything was crumbling, individual German soldiers still hunted for captured American Jeeps whenever possible. Personal mobility remained precious even as the larger ability to wage war dissolved entirely. German officers commandeered captured Jeeps to navigate between dissolving army units. German soldiers used them to escape advancing Allied columns. The transformation in German opinion about the Jeep represents one of the war's most astonishing reversals. In 1942, it had been dismissed as crude and primitive. By 1945, it had become the most coveted vehicle in the German military. When interrogators questioned German officers after the war concluded, they received consistent answers about American equipment quality. German commanders repeatedly ranked the Jeep among America's most impressive achievements. Some viewed it as more strategically valuable than American tanks or fighter aircraft. The reasoning never varied. Tanks commanded attention through raw power. Aircraft inspired awe through speed and altitude. But the Jeep enabled everything else to function. It delivered the mobility and flexibility that made American operations actually work. Firepower meant nothing without logistics supporting it. Novel tactics failed without vehicles that could move fast enough to implement them. The Jeep embodied American strengths in industrial production and organizational thinking better than nearly any other single item. The sheer quantity produced, the standardization across millions of units, the legendary reliability, and the remarkable versatility added up to something Germany simply could not replicate. General Fritz Bayerlein, who commanded German panzer forces in Normandy, told his post-war interrogators that the American Jeep ranked among the 3 most valuable pieces of equipment the Allies possessed. Only 2 other items joined it on his list: the long-range fighter aircraft that shepherded bomber streams across German skies, and the proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells that shredded German aircraft. What made the Jeep worthy of such distinguished company wasn't that it delivered devastating firepower or dramatic destruction. Rather, it multiplied the effectiveness of everything else. It was the force multiplier, the enabler, the critical linchpin. The story of German attitudes shifting from contempt to respect shows one of history's most complete reversals. In the opening years, 1941 and 1942, German intelligence officers studied the Jeep and dismissed it as crude and inferior to German designs. 12 months into actual combat in 1943, German field units were actively capturing Jeeps whenever opportunity arose. By 1944, Germany had established dedicated maintenance crews specifically trained to keep captured Jeeps running. Even as the war ended in 1945, with German society in ruins, soldiers in the field still treasured American Jeeps above almost everything else they could obtain. This progression reveals something far larger than one vehicle. Germany had entered the war convinced of its technical superiority and tactical brilliance. German tanks were the best. German tactics were superior. German soldiers were unbeatable. Early battlefield victories seemed to confirm these convictions. But America's massive industrial base, Its organizational genius and its practical engineering approach gradually wore down and ultimately overwhelmed whatever advantages Germany possessed initially. The Jeep sat at the center of this story. It wasn't the most technically sophisticated light vehicle available. German engineers could point to specific features of the Kübelwagen and argue legitimately that they showed greater technical cleverness and refinement. But sophistication mattered far less than something more fundamental: production capacity. America built enough Jeeps to outfit every unit that required them. America maintained them using universal parts available everywhere. America deployed them flexibly across every conceivable combat role. German soldiers in the field grasped this reality far sooner than commanders in distant headquarters. Soldiers watched American units moving with mobility they couldn't match. They observed American wounded reaching hospitals faster because transport was available. They saw American supplies advancing forward with speed and reliability. They recognized that American officers could respond to changing battlefield conditions rapidly and decisively. Much of this advantage stemmed from a single fact: enough Jeeps existed that mobility became routine, not exceptional. When German commanders captured intact American supply depots, they discovered something shocking. Warehouses stood packed with Jeeps and components. When they examined American organization charts, they found that even the tiniest American units had Jeep allocations written in. When they watched American operations unfold, Jeeps appeared constantly, hauling generals, towing artillery pieces, evacuating casualties, carrying ammunition. The sheer ubiquity had no German counterpart. Kübelwagens were valuable but scarce. German vehicles got carefully managed and assigned only to priority units. American Jeeps seemed almost disposable by comparison. Units losing Jeeps to combat simply requested replacements from supply depots containing thousands of vehicles. This abundance created remarkable strategic flexibility. American planners could design operations assuming essentially unlimited vehicles were available. German planners had to carefully portion out every vehicle they possessed and couldn't plan operations exceeding what limited vehicles they controlled. The Jeep's mechanical simplicity meant that even badly damaged units could often be repaired rapidly in the field. American maintenance doctrine emphasized fast repairs using extensive spare parts, stocks constantly available. Vehicles damaged beyond field repair simply got replaced rather than waiting weeks for depot-level overhauls. This approach demanded enormous supply chains, but resulted in consistently high readiness. German maintenance emphasized careful repair and conservation because replacements simply didn't exist. Damaged vehicles got repaired multiple times, keeping them operational but often running at degraded capacity. The distinction reflected different industrial realities. America could afford redundancy in design, accept battlefield losses, and continuously supply replacement equipment. Germany had to treasure every vehicle because factories couldn't replace them. The fundamental difference in approaches shaped what each side could accomplish strategically. The Jeep's wartime success influenced vehicle development globally after 1945. Every major military launched projects to create Jeep equivalents. The British developed the Land Rover. The Soviets created the Gaz-69. The French produced the Delahaye. Dozens of other vehicles drew inspiration from American Jeep experience. Even Germany, occupied and divided after 1945, developed its own Jeep derivative when the Bundeswehr formed in 1956. The DKW Munger showed clear Jeep influence in its basic layout and capabilities. Japan, fighting against Jeep-equipped Allied forces in the Pacific, later developed the Toyota Land Cruiser partially through studying captured American Jeeps. The commercial transformation proved even more dramatic. Willys understood the Jeep's market potential during wartime. As military production wound down in 1945, Willys introduced the CJ2A for civilian buyers. The vehicle kept the military Jeep's fundamental design, but added features for civilians: a proper tailgate, a side-mounted spare tire, and slightly improved seating comfort. Farmers and ranchers embraced it. Construction companies found it indispensable. Outdoor enthusiasts loved it. You could work all day towing farm equipment, then drive it home as family transportation. You could reach remote hunting camps and construction sites that conventional vehicles couldn't access. The CJ2A sold for $1090, expensive for the era but justified by its versatility. Sales stayed strong enough that Willys kept developing civilian variants. The CJ3A arrived in 1949 with a one-piece windshield. The CJ5 debuted in 1955 and became one of the longest-running vehicle models ever built, staying in production for 31 years. Civilian Jeep sales climbed steadily through the 1950s and 1960s, then exploded during the 1970s as recreational four-wheel drive vehicles became fashionable. The Jeep brand moved through several corporate owners: Willys, then Kaiser, then American Motors, then Chrysler. Each recognized the enormous value of the Jeep name and heritage. Modern Jeep vehicles like the Wrangler deliberately copy the original military design with its distinctive vertical grille slots and exposed door hinges. The direct line from the 1941 military Jeep to today's civilian SUVs represents one of automotive history's most successful product journeys. Jeep sales now exceed 1 million vehicles annually worldwide. A military requirement for a simple reconnaissance vehicle launched an entire vehicle category, generating tens of billions in annual revenue. The German experience with captured American Jeeps carries lessons reaching far beyond vehicle engineering. Technology means nothing without the infrastructure supporting it. The Kübelwagen represented clever engineering, but cleverness couldn't overcome limited production capacity, scarce parts, and fuel shortages. The Jeep succeeded not because it represented the most sophisticated possible design, but because it was good enough, produced in overwhelming quantities, and backed by comprehensive logistics. Standardization proved more valuable than optimization. Rather than developing multiple specialized vehicles, each optimized for particular missions, America built one standardized design adaptable to many missions. This created enormous advantages in production, maintenance, training, and logistics that outweighed any performance benefits from specialized designs. Mass production demanded different engineering philosophies. German vehicles often featured tight tolerances and precision manufacturing. This created excellent performance when new but complicated field repairs and required specialized components. American vehicles, particularly the Jeep, featured looser tolerances and simpler construction. Performance suffered slightly, but reliability and maintainability improved dramatically. The broader lesson: industrial capacity mattered more than individual weapon quality. American tanks, aircraft, and small arms often showed superior engineering to German equivalents. But superior individual weapons couldn't overcome massive numerical disadvantages. America built 643,000 Jeeps during the war. Germany built 50,000 Kübelwagens. The 12-to-1 production ratio told the strategic story completely. Training and doctrine multiplied these equipment advantages further. German forces trained extensively on vehicle maintenance and developed doctrine emphasizing mobility. This meant American units extracted maximum value from their vehicle advantages. German forces trained in infantry-focused tactics inherited from an army still heavily dependent on horse transport, sometimes failing to fully exploit their own mechanized equipment. Perception and reality diverged dramatically. German intelligence initially dismissed the Jeep through superficial assessment. Combat revealed the enormous gap between what they expected and what they experienced. Organizations relying on theoretical analysis rather than empirical testing risk catastrophic miscalculations. Logistics ultimately determined strategic possibilities. The availability of spare parts, fuel, and maintenance often mattered more than vehicle specifications. German units sometimes possessed superior equipment rendered useless by logistics failures. American logistics ensured Jeeps remained operational regardless of location or combat intensity. The laughter stopped in Tunisia. By May 1943, as German forces surrendered in North Africa, dismissive jokes about American engineering had vanished from German reports. They were replaced by requests for captured vehicles and grudging acknowledgments that American methods produced effective results. The progression shows the broader story. American industrial capacity gradually overwhelmed initial German advantages. The Jeep epitomized this story, not through technical sophistication, but through production capacity, reliability, and standardization multiplied across hundreds of thousands of vehicles. General George Marshall's assessment proved prophetic. The Jeep was indeed America's greatest contribution to modern warfare, not as the most powerful weapon, but as the enabler of everything else. The Willys MB and Ford GPW served faithfully through the war and beyond, but their influence exceeded their service life. They proved that mass production of standardized equipment, supported by efficient logistics, could decisively influence military outcomes. They demonstrated that industrial capacity itself was a form of military power. The German soldiers who laughed at the Jeep in 1941 had profoundly underestimated American industrial capability. By 1943, they were desperately trying to capture these vehicles. By 1945, they recognized that the Jeep represented everything about American power they had failed to comprehend. The Jeep went everywhere, accomplished everything, and kept going, exactly as America had designed it to do.